Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Brian Lowe. I am a sophomore aerospace engineering major from Texas A&M, and I was invited to talk to y'all today about my experience with NASA and what interning at NASA typically looks like. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Some more about me. Like I said, I'm from Texas A&M University. I've participated in the NASA La Space Academy, both in the Mission Concept Academy as a lead engineer and in the Proposal Writing Evaluation Experience Academy as a project manager. Aside from that, I also participated in the Crossman Drum and Bugle Corps for 3 years and also served as a mellophone section leader in the horn line. Next slide, please. So today, just to start out with, I'm going to talk about the main process of what it looked like getting my internship with NASA. There are three main topics I wanted to talk about. First, the application, then the interview process, and then finally what it looked like once I was hired. So going on, we'll start with the application process. I applied through NASA's Office of STEM Engagement. That's the NASA Force website. And basically what that looks like is once you make an account, you create a common application, you list all of your skills, you list all of your classes, your experiences. And then after that, you can go through and go look at projects that are available for interns and just select any project that you think you're a good match for. So it's a really easy process. I listed here that I listed very detailed and specific skills because a lot of projects are asking for specificity. I identified my leadership experiences both in extracurriculars at Texas A&M and through stuff like NASA La Space. I cross-referenced required skills with my own. So basically what that means is I went to go look at a project if it was something I was interested in, and I looked at the skills they were asking for specifically, the keywords that they had listed. And I checked to see if I had fit into any of those keywords. And if I did, and I didn't include them in my application, then I went back and made sure to list that specifically. And then after that, I applied to the projects that aligned with my interests and field. It was a pretty straightforward process. It is open all year round, so you can go through anytime, make your account, and apply to as up to 15 projects per semester, spring, summer, and fall. Next slide, please. After I applied, it took about 3 weeks to hear from a recruiter, and that recruiter wanted me to schedule an interview with her. And she had told me that a mentor was actually interested in my application after I had applied, and she was the one who was going to be contacting me sort of as a liaison between me and the actual mentor. And basically what happened is she called me. We had a really nice conversation. It did not feel like an interview. She was really good about making me feel comfortable and making sure that I was in every situation aware of what was going on, and it felt very relaxed. That was one of my favorite things about the interview. And so what she did is she recorded our conversation. She sent that over to the mentor so they could actually listen to my answers to some technical questions, and they would decide ultimately if they wanted me or not. And I listed this here on the last bullet. I sent a thank you email afterwards. That's typically really good practice for any sort of interview. It helps the interviewer keep you in their mind, especially right after an interview. They're planning on sending your information to the mentor. It's really good practice to follow up always. Next slide, please. So then next after the interview was the hiring process. It took another 2 to 3 weeks to receive my notice. And so that was about a month and a half total after I applied to the project. And I was placed in the Avionics Systems Division, which is abbreviated by EV. It's in the engineering branch of Johnson Space Center. And inside of Avionics Systems, I was placed in the Wireless and Communication Systems branch, which is specifically EV8. So in EV, there are a bunch of different branches. I think EV8 is actually the last branch. So it goes from EV1 to EV8. Every branch has specific projects that they work on, specific leads who all go and report to the head of the the avionics systems division. And I was also given a mentor who oversees my project. That was the same mentor who is interested in hiring me. So that all kind of ties in together. Next slide, please. Great. So what I'm working on right now, unfortunately, my internship is virtual. COVID has really restricted the amount of people who can be on site at Johnson Space Center. And from what I've heard, I don't think that there were going to be in-person internships until probably the start of 2022. So that's been an experience in and of itself. But right now, I've been shipped quite a few materials. I was shipped a laptop. I was shipped some hardware to work on. And what I'm primarily working on right now is creating a second version of the high altitude payload for predicting interference and near Earth spectral spread, which is abbreviated by HAPPINESS. So the HAPPINESS satellite basically it's powered by a Raspberry Pi. That's the brain of the satellite. And it uses that HAC-RF1, that little black box next to the Raspberry Pi. It uses that as a radio, and we launch it on a weather balloon. And as it goes into the atmosphere, it analyzes LTE band interference as a function of altitude. And that's really important to people at NASA, because when you think about LTE, you think about radio cell towers and how much range you can get per cell tower, right? And so a lot of cell towers are designed to get a lot of spread, but that's mainly horizontal. A lot of people only consider the horizontal spread of those radio towers. And so when people like NASA want to do projects on the ISS, we're not sure exactly how much of those signals are being projected up from the Earth and might cause interference. So that's why my project is important. It's really going to help NASA see whether or not the signals from Earth would interfere with any project on the ISS and maybe potentially the moon with the Artemis missions. On the last bullet there, I am responsible for the software and hardware components of it. So so I'm responsible for the software and hardware components. I'm coding the Raspberry Pi itself. We're using a lot of Python, and I have to be familiar with Linux systems and how to work a terminal. But I'm also building the payload itself. It's probably going to be a foot by foot by foot cube of, the power supply, the Raspberry Pi, the radio, stuff like that. So it's really interesting. It's hands-on and it's technical. So it's a really fun project to work on. Next slide, please. So that HAPPINESS payload wasn't supposed to be my primary project. What I was supposed to be working on was analyzing the characteristics of Wi-Fi 6, the update to the 802.11 protocol. And I was supposed to be measuring throughput, which is basically how fast packets can be sent through a router, Wi-Fi 6 enabled router. And I was supposed to be assessing the relationship between legacy and new hardware. Legacy referring to hardware that isn't Wi-Fi 6 enabled, so Wi-Fi 5 and all of those, and how they interact with the new Wi-Fi 6 enabled hardware. And the reason I was supposed to be working on that was because astronauts on the ISS had actually started complaining about internet speeds. So they had wanted faster internet, but they didn't want to be restricted to one spot on the ISS by using Ethernet cables. So Johnson Space Center was trying to figure out how to solve that problem. And luckily, Wi-Fi 6 is a brand new update to the protocol. It was just released at the beginning of this year. and it is really, really fast. It is a lot faster than previous versions of Wi-Fi, and being able to somehow incorporate that on the ISS would be really beneficial. I was really looking forward to working on that project, but unfortunately, because everything was virtual, a previous intern from the summer was working on starting that project, and he had a couple of Wi-Fi 6 enabled laptops that he was supposed to ship back to Johnson so that I could eventually receive them. And FedEx somehow lost them in the mail between Indianapolis, where that intern lives, and Houston. So that's kind of put a pause on that project for now. I'm currently in the process of getting new laptops to continue working on that, but I figured I'd let you know what I was supposed to be working on. It's kind of a funny situation, but I'm happy to be working on happiness. Next slide, please. So the biggest takeaways thus far, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this is my first co-op with Johnson Space Center. I started at the beginning of January. We're about halfway through February. So about a month and a half worth of work that I've put into this internship. And yeah, the biggest takeaways primarily is learning how to work independently. A lot of times I'll meet with my mentor probably at the beginning of the week. We'll talk about what I've worked on, some obstacles I might have faced, and then he'll give me a direction. He won't give me specific instructions, but he'll tell me probably the end goal I should be reaching, and he'll send me on my way. So then I have the rest of the week, a 40-hour work week, by the way, because I'm a full-time intern. I have the rest of the week between 9 to 5 that I have to try and figure out those problems, try and work on my own, and overcome a lot of the obstacles that I had faced. So learning how to do that, learning how to finish a project without direct instructions has been very difficult, but it's been very rewarding in the same way. And yeah, I've also had to overcome obstacles that come from a virtual internship. You know, the basic stuff such as waking myself up on time, making sure I don't get distracted, or even making sure I take my lunch break. Sometimes I'll be working and I'll forget to take a break, which is really not very good. I don't recommend that. So being able to manage my time and learn how to work independently has been one of the best things that I've learned how to do just thus far. Another big takeaway is I've obtained a greater understanding of Johnson Space Center and the divisions and branches within it. I understand now that the hierarchy, as you could call it, of employees at Johnson Space Center is really important. And it's very, very, I guess it's important to follow those protocols. Everyone reports to someone, and that's for a reason. And another big takeaway is the networking opportunities between other interns and professionals. I use LinkedIn a lot. Being able to connect with people at Johnson Space Center is really beneficial, not only for right now, but for my future career. Who knows, 20 years down the line, I might run into those same people that I'm talking to or working with today. And it's really awesome to stay in touch with those people, especially now, and stay in touch for however long, you can. It's really, really awesome. So I highly recommend everyone use LinkedIn, everyone stay connected, and keep those connections. I think that's my last slide. It was a rather quick presentation. I kind of sped through that, but if there are any questions about me, about NASA, about the intern process, I'd really look forward to answering them. I'll answer them to the best of my abilities. So yeah, thank you for having me, by the way, but are there any questions?
If anyone has any questions, feel free to say them out loud or leave them in the chat. Just to start off, I'll ask you 2 questions of my own. How long will your internship last? Is it till you're done the project, or is it term-based?
That's a great question. So right now I am in a term-based internship. So my term ends at the end of April, but there's a really good chance that if I don't finish the project by then, the project can continue into the summer, and I could possibly get rehired for that summer term.
Are there any different projects you're looking forward to working on in the future, or do you plan on staying on this project?
So that's kind of the funny thing. I was hired because of my knowledge in Linux. I had operated a couple Linux terminals and had actually switched my computer over to a Linux operating system last year. And so when I was hired, that's what they were looking for. But a lot of the work I'm doing, like I mentioned, is in Wi-Fi, is in LTE. So I'm not really familiar with that. Um, I am an aerospace engineer, so being able to work in design or in systems design would be really cool. I would probably really love doing that type of stuff.
There is one question for you from the chat, and it is, what inspired you to get your start and become involved with NASA?
Yeah, so NASA, I think, was always kind of a dream for me. I grew up being a huge space fanatic. I think my dad taught me my first constellation at around age 6 or 7. And ever since then, I've always been looking into the stars. I've always been obsessed with space. And NASA was a really good outlet for that. They have tons of educational programs. They have tons of opportunities to get involved in space. I think for a while I had spent hours a day just watching YouTube videos about stuff NASA's doing, about space, all that fun stuff. And it was really awesome because my cousin is actually an employee at Johnson Space Center. I didn't realize that until maybe I was about 15 or 16, but she's been working there for over 20 years now. And my family would always visit Johnson Space Center when I was growing up, probably once a summer. And I never knew why we would go, but turns out we were going to visit my cousin. And, growing up in that atmosphere, growing up and looking forward to those visits to Johnson Space Center, it really incited something in me. And I think I don't know, probably since the end of elementary school, I knew I wanted to eventually work for NASA.
Well, that looks to be all the questions for today. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you again for having me. If any of you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to connect with you. And yeah, I look forward to eventually hearing some of y'all's webinars as well.